Political reporter Teddy Schleifer, who broke the news on Senator Cruz's announcement, along with Democrat former Pennsylvania Governor Ed Rendell and conservative radio talk show host Steve Deace, author of the book Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again. So, Steve, on that note, I'll start with you. Is this the candidate? Is this the man you and others have been waiting for?
Well, he certainly sounded like it in the speech that he gave this morning, Tamron. I mean, what you heard is essentially one of the most powerful compilations of conservative thought and belief that really we've heard in a generation. And, you know, when Ted Cruz opens his mouth, the Republican base comes out. He's really the firstborn child of this new anti-establishment environment that a lot of people like myself and others have been involved in crafting. And now he's got to show that he can put together a credible campaign, that he can rally people, that he can make the transition from soldier to general. And I think that's now what the next phase of the process is about.
Governor Rendell, that brings, of course, the question of a credible campaign when you start out with going after Obamacare. Let's play what Senator Cruz said in this announcement.
Imagine in 2017, a new president signing legislation repealing every word of Obamacare. Imagine health care reform that keeps government out of the way between you and your doctor, and that makes health insurance personal and portable and affordable.
So, Governor Rendell, we know that's an applause line, but how do you believe that this will play beyond that audience and some of the conservatives who still get rallied up when they hear repeal Obamacare with very little of what will it be replaced with, quite honestly?
Well, clearly, the biggest problem is by that time there'll be 23, 24 million people who would be thrown off health care if you repealed Obamacare, and that's not practical. That's not something that anybody's really going to want to do. But Senator Cruz has really three battles ahead. One, the battle for the conservative Republican right. And he's going to battle Mike Huckabee, maybe, Ben Carson, Scott Walker, Rand Paul. And he's got to win that battle. Secondly, he's got to win the money battle. Casey is very right. A big test for him will be how much money he can raise. Can he raise enough to be in there for the long haul? And then the third question is, can he convince Republican voters, even some conservatives, who might like what he says, who might like the way he delivers a message, but who are worried about winnability? Can you campaign the way Ted Cruz is campaigning now and win a general election? And I would submit the answer to that is absolutely not.
And that was the question that was asked throughout the Republican primary as well, the last go around. But Teddy, let me read a little bit of what you wrote regarding the money here. You say, over the course of the primary campaign, Cruz will aim to raise between $40 million and $50 million and dominate with the same Tea Party voters who supported his underdog Senate campaign in 2012. But the key to victory, Cruz advisors believe, is to be the second choice of enough voters in the party's libertarian conservative wings to cobble together a coalition to defeat the chosen candidate of the Republican establishment. As pointed out by Governor Rendell, what then happens beyond, if he can cobble together, as you pointed out, this coalition? Can he then, though, end up in the White House?
Right. You know, it is March Madness season, and Senator Cruz kind of sees this as the primary campaign as a series of brackets. You know, Senator Cruz is caricatured as a divisive figure, so it's pretty compelling to see that his plan for victory in the Republican primary compels on cobbling together, you know, obviously a Tea Party base, but also social conservatives who might be prone to break for Mike Huckabee or Rick Santorum, and also libertarians who are prone to break for Senator Rand Paul. So once he cobbles together that coalition, I think Governor Rendell is correct. The next question is going to be, how does he advance that, you know, that hodgepodge coalition of conservatives and bring that into a general election against Hillary Clinton, who he is currently trailing pretty solidly in early public opinion polls.
Absolutely. Even with the Wall Street Journal poll from earlier this month, Ted Cruz is in the 8th slot. At the bottom of the candidate voters would see themselves supporting out of the Republican Party. You see him there at the very bottom. But Teddy, you mentioned that he has a caricature of being this divisive individual or divisive, rebel Texan, if you will. But it seems to be something he's embraced over time, and even to the point where it seems that he revels in getting under the nails of Senator McCain and other establishment GOP.
Right. I mean, even though Senator Cruz does kind of trail the pack in early public opinion polls, I mean, I think his senior advisors and other Cruz allies would argue that his support is firmer. You know, Senator Cruz's supporters will come out on an Iowa winter to go caucus for him, and they'll be there no matter what. I mean, that to them is kind of a key advantage that might not be able to be said supporters of Governor Bush or Governor Walker or even of Governor Perry here in Texas.
And Steve Deace, let me bring you in. Obviously, Harvard-educated. Senator Cruz has been criticized as of late for a number of things, including his recent remarks on climate change. He was on Late Night with Seth Meyers. He's picking up, being on a number of shows trying to expose himself to Americans who will vote. But here's what he said.
I just came back from New Hampshire where there's snow and ice everywhere. And my view actually is simple. Debates on this should follow science and should follow data. And many of the alarmists on global warming, they got a problem because the science doesn't back them up. And in particular, satellite data demonstrate for the last 17 years, there's been zero warming, none whatsoever. It's why, you remember how it used to be called global warming? And then magically the theory changed to climate change?
Sure.
The reason is it wasn't warming, but the computer models still say it is, except the satellites show it's not.
So there you have it, Steve Deace. Here's this hip show, obviously shot in New York, but appeals to young people who I think many of which would gasp at thinking that climate change was not seen as something real, particularly by a Harvard-educated attorney here. With that said, that might play in a primary. How does that play beyond for Ted Cruz and other candidates?
Well, a couple of things, Tamron. Number one, what y'all find divisive in the Beltway is exactly what unites coalitions just about everywhere else, particularly in the Republican Party. I mean, he gets heroes welcomes everywhere else he goes outside of the 212 and 202 area code. So, I mean, I really don't care what polls say. I wouldn't care if no matter which candidate I was. I mean, if I would have told you at this point in the cycle in 2008 Mike Huckabee was going to win Iowa, you would have laughed at me. If I would have told you at this point in the cycle Rick Santorum was going to win Iowa in 2012, y'all would have laughed at me. So, I mean, we don't really care what the polls say. You got to let the process play itself out. And the other thing, too, is this is how has changed the game, and Ed ought to take this as credit. I mean, the highest form of flattery is imitation. Obama proved you don't win elections anymore by changing minds. The mushy middle doesn't exist anymore. They know that Kim Kardashian broke the internet. They don't know that Joe Biden is vice president. You win elections by targeting your voters, finding who is the most likely to vote for you, and even driving them to the polls and turning them out. You micro-target them. You use social media. That is really the new game. I mean, the Electoral College is pretty much locked in. There's really only a handful of states, Virginia being one of them, that are truly up for grabs for both parties, no matter who each side's nominee is. And I think that's where Obama has shown that the on-the-ground political game has changed in this era. And, Ted Cruz, being 44 years old, sees that. He's not necessarily running the same kind of campaign that we're going to run and that we ran in the 80s and the 90s. And I think the rest of the Republican field that wants to be a conservative alternative to Jeb Bush, they would be wise to follow that lead.
Governor Rendell, let you respond to Steve.
Well, no one who's won the Iowa Republican primary has gone on to win the nomination. Iowa's not very representative of even the Republican Party.
That's just not true. George W. Bush won the Iowa caucuses and won the nomination. We've picked the last four general election winners. Ed, your guy and George W. Bush.
I'm talking about the Iowa Republicans, and he won it against Ronald Reagan, who he lost the nomination to. But the bottom line is that what Ted Cruz has to do is appeal to American voters. It's not just good enough to get your base out. Just think of what Governor Romney did in the first debate. He swayed enough independent voters and conservative Democrats to surge almost ahead in the polls. So content does matter. And if Ted Cruz feeds the base and just feeds them red meat content that doesn't make sense to ordinary voters, he's going to lose enough voters in the primary process.
But the reason Romney did that in the first debate, the Romney did that in the first debate is because he sounded like Ted Cruz on the stage at Liberty today. He walked that back in the next two debates, and that's why he lost. He didn't draw any contrast at all. And remember, George W. Bush won the Iowa caucuses, won the nomination, won the presidency. We've picked the last 4 general election winners. I know y'all hate Iowa out there, but the truth is the truth. The record is the record. We've picked the last 4 general election winners.
It's not true in the Republican primary. So
George W. Bush didn't win the Iowa caucuses?
What Ted Cruz has to do is he has to win Iowa. If he doesn't win Iowa, he's done. He's finished. He's toast. He has to do reasonably well in New Hampshire.
Everybody in the field, actually.
He has to do reasonably well in New Hampshire.
And everybody else.
Well, we will have plenty more to discuss, obviously, as more candidates decide to jump into the race.
Please brush up on who won the Iowa caucuses.
And we don't hate Iowa, Steve, and I think you know that as well. So I'll leave it on that note. Thank you very much, Teddy. Thank you as well for joining us. Up next.